I don't think Jesus is nearly as interested in monuments and monument building as maybe we are. We have this way of wanting to make things permanent by carving them in stone and putting them up in big public places, or plastering them all over our walls, thinking that's what really matters, making big public displays of words that are important. And Jesus just isn't. He's a lot more interested, as we'll see this coming Sunday, in inscribing his way of life, his commandments, if you will, on our hearts and in our lives. That's the conversation we're going to be having this coming Sunday. We're going to be continuing to take a look. This Sunday is the 6th Sunday of Easter. And in these weeks, we get to hear words from Jesus in what's sometimes called the upper room discourse. Words Jesus gives to his inner circle of disciples on his last night with them, knowing that soon everything is about to change. He's headed to a cross, and before long to resurrection and to a whole new way of relating to them, and that things are going to change. So this is Jesus' chance between washing his disciples' feet and being betrayed in the garden to say all the things that need to be said, both promises and directions, sort of a here's what I want for you, here's what I'm giving to you as resources, and here's what I need you to know before I don't get the chance anymore. And you'll hear as Jesus talks in this last chance he has with his disciples, you'll see Jesus talks about commandments, but he's not interested in getting his disciples to set up monuments somewhere, but rather that we be people who live in a certain way of life. And here's what he says in the 14th chapter of John's Gospel. If you love me, you will keep my commandments. And I will ask the Father, and he will give you another advocate to be with you forever. This is the Spirit of truth, whom the world cannot receive, because it neither sees him nor knows him. You know him, because he abides with you, and he will be in you. I will not leave you orphaned. I am coming to you. In a little while, the world will no longer see me, but you will see me. Because I live, you also will live. On that day, you will know that I am in the Father, and you in me, and I in you. They who have my commandments and keep them are those who love me. And those who love me will be loved by my Father, and I will love them and reveal myself to them. So yeah, there's a fair amount of talking about Jesus and commandments, the commandments of Jesus to his disciples there. But you'll notice what Jesus has in mind is that the community of his followers will enshrine those commandments, not in stone or plastering them on walls and places to show everybody how important they are, how in charge they are, but rather that we'll be people who live by Jesus' kind of teaching. And again, when we talk about commandments, it is real easy for us to immediately go to, these are national laws that are meant to be prescribed by all. This is about national laws that everybody has to follow. And Jesus doesn't talk or think like that. Jesus isn't king or Caesar. He's not looking to start a nation or build an empire or even run for a legislature. Jesus is a rabbi telling his community of followers how they will live in the midst of a world that plays by different rules and doesn't keep Jesus' commandments. Jesus is a rabbi talking to disciples about how they will live out his way of life, the will of God in their lives, not saying we've got to decree that everybody has to do what we do. No, the Jesus way of life only makes sense if you're following Jesus. To be honest, even the actual commandments that were carved in stone back in ancient Israel's past weren't set up as monuments to be adored at a distance. They were stone tablets that went with the people from place to place to place, a sort of a reminder of God going with them. And even when we talk about the commandments of ancient Israel in the Hebrew Bible, what's sometimes called the Torah, instead of just hearing that as law, like a bunch of national legislature rules, there's more of a sense of instruction or a way of life, how we live our lives together. And that's what Jesus taps into here when he talks about living and keeping his commandments. You want to know how I'll know you love me is when you do the things I've taught you to do, when you care for one another the way I've taught you to, when you live in the world the way I've taught you to. That's what I'm looking for. That's what it looks like. And Jesus doesn't just sort of leave it to us on our own, saying, you've heard all the things I've taught you, now do your best and good luck, and if you do well enough on your final exam, I'll see you in heaven. But rather, Jesus says, you're not going to be on your own. I'm not leaving you on your own. I'm giving you an advocate. I'm giving you the very presence of the Spirit through whom I will still be with you in a meaningful way. So you're not just on your own. You're not just left with a bunch of written rules trying to figure out, well, how does this one apply to my life? How does this one apply to my life? but my Spirit will be with you, directing you as community to live the Jesus way of life. So to be sure, following Jesus is not separable from keeping Jesus' commandments. But again, when Jesus gives commandments, directions to his followers, it's not so much like the tax rate should be such and such, or we should have this many days for this kind of season, or he's not passing national laws. Jesus is talking about a way to live in the world. And the kinds of things Jesus teaches his disciples to do look an awful lot like love. Love for neighbor, love for stranger, love for enemy. It's about being willing to be vulnerable in a world that knows only meanness and vengeance and vindictiveness. It's about being generous in a world that's stingy. It's about not needing to put yourself first, but being willing to put yourself in the role of servant to lift up those who are lowly. It's about making sure everybody gets to eat. It's about looking out for those who are pushed to the margin, treated like they don't matter. It's about not wielding power as a weapon to beat somebody else with, but using whatever influence or resources or platform you have to help lift and care for somebody else. When you actually pay attention to what Jesus commands his disciples to do, it's not that he's building a nation or an empire and wants us to plaster his words all over in decrees on walls or monuments in public squares. Jesus assumes we will live his commandments. And yeah, we're going to blow it. We're going to mess up. This is not a conversation about if you do well enough, then you'll get in. Jesus' presence, Jesus' Spirit is the guarantee here. Jesus' Spirit continues to guide, to redirect. And when we blow it, we start over again. I suppose that's the other important difference, right? When you're carving something in stone, if you mess up, there's no eraser for a monument carved in stone. You got to start all over again, knock down the stone, crumble it down, and get another piece of stone, because there's no room for mistakes. But for the community of Jesus, yeah, when we mess up, we own it. But then we start over again, because the Spirit keeps moving and redirecting us like the wind pushing a sail along, not just giving force, but giving direction. The Spirit is like that in our lives, not just giving us energy, but giving us direction too. The followers of Jesus are called to follow Jesus' commandments. But hear that as something life-giving, as living the Jesus way of life, not you must follow these rules or else you're out and that's the final word. It's about living a way of life. And when we do that together, and we discover that it's about living in the kind of love Jesus has been telling us and teaching us about all along, and this isn't burdensome, this is hopeful. This is how do I navigate in a world where everybody else doesn't necessarily agree with the way I live my life, or doesn't necessarily acknowledge Jesus or share my faith. Instead of me saying, we have to put up rules so that everybody will follow my set of rules. No, how do I live in a world following Jesus, knowing people around me won't necessarily follow Jesus or believe the same things I do about God. And I don't have to be freaking out about that. I don't have to be worried or upset. Nope, it's okay. I'll be someone who follows Jesus in the midst of a world that doesn't necessarily. And I'll do that by living the Jesus way of life where I am, following Jesus in my life, in my sphere of influence, and letting that be compelling and powerful that it draws other people as well. I'm not saying we've got to set up the monuments in the public square first and then worry about following them. Jesus says, just trust. My Spirit will be with you. I will still be with you. That's what Jesus has been after all along. People who live the Jesus way of life. So when you hear commandments, think less about something carved and chiseled in granite, and more about the presence of God's own Spirit within us, leading us to walk in ways of love. That's the conversation we're having this Sunday, and we're inviting you to be a part of it. See you then.